They say moments can change your life in the blink of an eye, but no one on Delta Flight 1765 expected a racial microaggression to ignite the biggest twist of their year. The cabin lights buzzed softly as passengers jostled for overhead space, while an unassuming black woman quietly settled into her seat. Little did the flight attendant know the target of her haughty request to switch seats wasn't just another passenger. She was an undercover Federal Aviation Administration official conducting a surprise inspection. What began as an ordinary flight would soon spiral into a riveting saga of prejudice, power, and poetic justice. It was 6 a.m. when the faint rays of sunrise began to illuminate Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport's sprawling runways. The airport, typically abuzz with relentless activity, shimmered with an air of frenetic excitement that particular morning. Several dozen planes awaited clearance, and passengers swarmed the concourses balancing coffees, rolling suitcases, and boarding passes printed at the last minute. Among the crowd was Bernice Campbell, a seasoned Federal Aviation Administration FAA official known for her sharp eye and no-nonsense approach to ensuring airline compliance. Dressed casually in a navy blue blazer and dark trousers, Bernice blended seamlessly with the throng of travelers. Her short-cropped hair framed her face, and a single carry-on bag hung from her shoulder. Most assumed she was just another businesswoman flying on a tight schedule. But Bernice's purpose that morning was anything but routine. She had been assigned to conduct a surprise inspection on Delta Flight 1765, heading from Atlanta to Seattle. The FAA had received a tip allegations of unprofessional cabin crew behavior, questionable safety practices, and possible discrimination issues. Bernice had spent hours the previous night reviewing the flight's operational logs and the personnel assigned to the route. Everything seemed normal on paper, but she knew better than anyone that numbers can be deceiving. She approached the terminal gate, noticing the usual scurry of the boarding process. Gate attendants scanned boarding passes and passports without fuss, mechanical in their courtesy. Delta's name glowed in bright red letters above them, beckoning travelers to hustle onto the aircraft. Bernice made a point not to flash her credentials. Her assignment was discreet. If the flight crew recognized an FAA official, their behavior might be different, more careful. For a thorough inspection, authenticity of behavior was key. Bernice's seat assignment was in the main cabin 22A, an aisle seat that would let her observe the flight attendant's duties while remaining unobtrusive. Looking around the waiting area, she noted the diversity of her fellow passengers. Business travelers flipping through laptops, families corralling excited children, and elderly couples who seemed to have all the time in the world. The overhead announcer chimed, signaling that pre-boarding for special assistance passengers was about to start. Bernice took a measured breath. She knew that once she stepped onto the aircraft, her observational role would fully begin. She was ready, determined, to see whether the allegations held any truth, and if they did, she would have to decide what to do with that knowledge, quietly correct the issues, or blow the whistle wide open. Bernice was among the second group of passengers to board the plane, filing down the jet bridge behind a business executive who was grumbling into his cell phone. Her carry-on felt heavier by the minute, not so much from weight, but from the anticipation coiling in her gut. Every footstep echoed with the awareness that she was about to scrutinize the actions of the crew, even if she hoped to find nothing but routine professionalism. Inside the aircraft, the flight attendants wore bright smiles, tinged with the usual early morning fatigue. One offered a lukewarm greeting, another pointed passengers to their seats. Bernice spotted a flight attendant named Cindy, tall and blonde, with a crisp uniform, exuding a certain sternness that clashed with her forced grin. At first glance, she appeared polite enough, but Bernice's experience told her that first impressions could be deceiving. Bernice quietly took her aisle seat, 22A. As she wedged her carry-on into the overhead bin, she noticed a slender, older woman occupying the middle seat in her row, rummaging through a large purse. Meanwhile, a mother and her toddler settled into the window seat. The child looked both sleepy and excited, eyes wide at the idea of flying among the clouds. Before Bernice could fully settle, the overhead speakers crackled, reminding passengers to stow their baggage and find their seats promptly. The flight was scheduled for an on-time departure, a small victory in an industry plagued by delays. Bernice loosened the top button of her blazer, ensuring she could move comfortably if she needed to check on anything suspicious. Scanning the cabin from her seat, Bernice spotted Cindy methodically checking seat belts, overhead compartments, and passenger compliance with turn-off-your-phone announcements. Another flight attendant. Reggie seemed friendlier, gently helping passengers lift heavy carry-ons. Bernice made a mental note to keep an eye on both. She intended to see how each attendant handled different passenger issues, especially those that might expose underlying biases or procedural shortcuts. Across the aisle, a row of seats contained a couple wearing matching travel pillows, flipping through an in-flight magazine. Further down, a tall man struggled to fit a large guitar case into the overhead bin. The hustle and bustle of boarding was the perfect time to observe how flight attendants responded to minor stresses. So far, everything looked as routine as any other flight Bernice had inspected. But as the final passengers trickled down the aisle, Bernice had a faint sense that trouble was brewing. She wasn't sure from where, but the atmosphere shifted just enough to make her instincts flare. Sometimes, small moments, even the tilt of a crew member's head or the tone of voice they used, could hint at bigger problems to come. And this flight was about to be anything but ordinary. The plane began taxiing toward the runway, and Bernice observed Cindy and Reggie take their jump seats for the safety demonstration. Reggie performed the demo with an air of warmth, smiling as he mimed securing the seatbelt and donning the oxygen mask. Cindy delivered the spoken script, her words clipped and precise. Her tone carried a certain coolness, as though she were repeating instructions to a group of unruly high school students rather than paying customers. Bernice found herself subtly comparing Reggie's approach to Cindy's. Reggie's eyes connected with passengers. Cindy stared at some fixed point on the bulkhead. After the demonstration, both flight attendants secured themselves as the aircraft sped down the runway. Within minutes, the Boeing 737 lifted off, piercing through low-hanging clouds into the bright morning sky. The seatbelt sign remained on for a while as the flight encountered mild turbulence shortly after takeoff. Bernice noticed Cindy's brow furrow as though the bumpiness irritated her on a personal level. When the seatbelt sign finally dimmed, the older woman sitting beside Bernice asked Cindy for an extra blanket. Cindy's response was stiff, pointing vaguely to the overhead bin where the airline typically stored them. The passenger apologized for asking, but Cindy didn't seem to notice the quiver of embarrassment in the older woman's voice. Bernice's gaze followed Cindy as she moved further down the aisle, pausing by a black family seated in row 19. The father had pressed the call button, likely to request something for their restless children. Cindy's expression hardened further. Even from a few rows back, Bernice could sense the tension. The father and Cindy exchanged a few words too soft for Bernice to catch. Then Cindy turned on her heel, striding away, without fulfilling whatever request had been made. The father and mother exchanged confused glances as if they weren't sure what just happened. This was precisely the kind of behavior Bernice had been tipped off about flight attendants who were inattentive or discourteous to certain passengers. Yet it was too soon to jump to conclusions. She had a full flight ahead and the chance to observe plenty more interactions. Still, an uneasy feeling settled in her stomach. She scribbled a quick note in a small notebook she kept tucked inside her blazer pocket, the same method she'd used for years to document in-flight observations. As she closed her notebook, Bernice noticed Cindy stopping at the row directly behind her. A tall black woman, clad in a soft grey sweater, was seated by the window. The seat next to her was vacant until Cindy approached with an unmistakable air of confrontation. Bernice couldn't hear the exact words, but she saw the flight attendant's lips tighten and the woman's eyes widen in disbelief. Little did Cindy realize she was on the brink of setting off a chain of events that would shake the entire airline and land her at the center of an investigation she never saw coming. From her vantage point, Bernice strained to hear the conversation behind her. The tall black woman in the grey sweater, her name, as Bernice would learn later, was Darlene Moore, looked utterly stunned. Cindy stood in the aisle, arms crossed, tapping her foot with impatience. The gist of it was clear. Cindy wanted Darlene to move. At first, Bernice assumed it might be a request tied to weight balance or seating for an infirm passenger, typical scenarios that occasionally demanded shuffling. But one glance around revealed the plane was not full. There were several vacant rows scattered throughout. Why on earth would Cindy single out Darlene? "You're in the wrong seat," Cindy said, loudly enough for Bernice to catch the clipped words. Darlene fumbled for her boarding pass. "This is 23F, right?" Cindy's face hardened. "Yes, but I need you to move to 26B. We have other passengers who might need the space." Confusion flickered across Darlene's face. She showed Cindy her ticket, pointing to the seat assignment that clearly stated 23F. The flight had been in the air for nearly half an hour. If seat assignments were incorrect, it should have been addressed long before takeoff. Moreover, 6B was not a window seat. It was a middle seat near the back by the lavatories. Passengers around them began to notice the tension. A couple across the aisle whispered to each other, eyes darting from Cindy to Darlene. The father a few rows forward, who'd been ignored earlier, turned around to watch. Darlene tried to politely clarify, "I'd prefer to stay here. It's what I booked and paid for." Cindy's lips formed a thin line. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to cooperate." It was obvious from her tone that cooperate was a euphemism for comply without questioning. Bernice had witnessed many seat reassignments in her career, but rarely one conducted with such a harsh attitude and lacking a valid explanation. She stiffened in her seat, resisting the urge to intervene. Her role was to observe, but sometimes that line blurred when faced with blatant injustice. Darlene held her ground. "I don't see any reason to give up my seat. This is mine." Cindy's cheeks flushed. She glanced down the aisle as if seeking backup from Reggie or another crew member, but no one immediately came. A knot tightened in Bernice's stomach. The flight attendant's body language and tone carried undertones far more sinister than a mere seat confusion. This confrontation was stoking a dangerous tension, and Bernice suspected racism was at play. The question was, how far would Cindy push it before someone stepped in? Bernice leaned forward, trying not to attract attention, but ready to speak up if the situation escalated further. A few more passengers craned their necks, forming a small audience to the confrontation. Reggie, sensing the disturbance, came hustling down the aisle. His eyes flicked from Cindy to Darlene, then to the seat in question. With an apologetic smile, he asked, "Is there a problem here?" "I need this seat free," Cindy said, crossing her arms tighter. "We might have a passenger with special needs joining us." Reggie's eyebrows rose. "We have no such requests that I'm aware of." He looked at Darlene's boarding pass, verifying it. "Ma'am, I see you have 23F. That's exactly where you're supposed to be. There must be some misunderstanding." Cindy shot Reggie a glare that could have melted steel. "I was informed." Otherwise, she insisted, her voice wavering slightly. Darlene seemed on the verge of tears or anger. It was hard to tell which emotion would erupt first. The tension was thick enough to slice with a butter knife. In the seat ahead, Bernice felt her hand trembling against the notebook in her lap. She'd heard allegations that certain flight attendants targeted black passengers, often under flimsy pretenses. Yet witnessing it firsthand was jarring. She made a quick note of Cindy's wording, tone, and body language. This was no mere guess. It was evidence. Reggie quietly took Cindy aside, whispering so passengers wouldn't hear. But Bernice caught snippets. That seat is legitimately hers. No record of any special needs passenger. You can't force. Their conversation grew more heated, and eventually Reggie gestured for Cindy to follow him toward the galley. Cindy stomped off, leaving a tense hush in her wake. Around Darlene, a mix of relief and unease settled. A few passengers murmured sympathetic words to her. She offered a shaky smile in return, but said little. Bernice knew from experience that such public confrontations can leave travelers feeling both violated and humiliated. Adding the racial undertone made it even more painful. Within a few moments, Reggie re-emerged with a plastic cup of water, handed it to Darlene, and apologized softly. He promised to look into the matter. Meanwhile, Cindy remained out of sight, likely cooling off in the galley. Bernice exhaled. The flight had barely begun, and already she had witnessed a glaring instance of potential discrimination, and something told her it wouldn't be the last. For the next half hour, the cabin settled into a forced calm. Flight attendants began their beverage service, gliding carts down the aisle, offering sodas, juices, and coffee. Reggie took care of most of Bernice's section, politely asking if anyone wanted snacks. Cindy lingered further up front, attending to first-class passengers with a demeanor markedly different from how she'd acted with Darlene. From Bernice's vantage point, Cindy appeared pleasant, even chatty with certain travelers. But each time she glanced toward the economy cabin, a pinched look returned to her face. Bernice requested a black coffee, needing the warmth and caffeine to steady her nerves. Each time Cindy passed by, Bernice carefully observed her posture, her eye contact, and whom she chose to assist. Patterns emerged. Cindy was at ease with certain demographics, but stiffened around others, especially black passengers. The father with the young children in row 19 received lukewarm responses, if any, when he pressed the call button for a juice refill. Conversely, a white couple in row 17 found Cindy quite attentive. It was subtle, but after years on the job, Bernice recognized the signs. She continued jotting notes discreetly, well aware that she'd have to formalize her observations into a report upon landing. Should she confront Cindy? The question hung in her mind. But confrontation might blow her cover, hindering her ability to observe more natural behavior. She decided to remain a quiet witness for now, though her conscience was far from settled. Throughout the cabin, pockets of conversation buzzed. Darlene occasionally exchanged soft words with another passenger, perhaps receiving moral support. The older woman beside Bernice did her best to relax, sipping ginger ale and reading a romance novel. Meanwhile, the toddler in 22F had dozed off, resting an adorable cheek against the window. Amid these normal scenes of in-flight life, an undercurrent of tension rippled. Everyone seemed to sense that something was off. Bernice's phone buzzed gently in airplane mode, an odd occurrence given there was no cell service at 30,000 feet. Then she remembered she'd set an alarm to remind her to check the seatbelt compliance once the service concluded. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, scanning the cabin again. Something told her that the seat switch incident was just the beginning. Cindy's attitude, if left unchecked, could spiral into a bigger problem with real consequences. Bernice dreaded the possibility that this flight might end in a fiasco. Still, she braced herself, determined to fulfill her duty, no matter where the day led. The flight reached cruising altitude without further turbulence. Reggie and another flight attendant, Martha, collected snack wrappers, half-empty cups, and crumpled napkins. Cindy remained stationed in the galley at the front, avoiding most of the main cabin. Occasionally, Bernice caught glimpses of her from her seat, pacing like a caged tiger. There was something distinctly unsettling in Cindy's body language, anxious, irritated, and perhaps even ashamed. Bernice decided to stretch her legs, taking the excuse of using the forward lavatory to approach the galley. She navigated the narrow aisle, carefully passing the beverage cart. Once near the front, she feigned waiting for a passenger to exit the lavatory, using the moment to overhear any snippet of conversation among the flight attendants. Cindy was whispering to Martha, her voice trembling with anger. "I don't care if she's officially in that seat. I wanted her to move, and now Reggie's making me look bad in front of everyone." Martha, older and with soft lines around her eyes, tried to calm Cindy down. "Just let it go. The passenger's within her rights. You know we have to follow the airline's policies, and Reggie wasn't trying to undermine you. He's just doing his job." Cindy let out a huff. "Yeah, well, it's humiliating. People are watching me like I'm some kind of monster." Bernice inwardly noted Cindy's use of the word people in a tone that suggested she didn't like being accountable to them. The conversation also revealed that Cindy felt singled out, perhaps out of guilt or embarrassment. Could it be that deep down she knew her request to move Darlene had been baseless, motivated by bias? Just then the lavatory door opened and a passenger squeezed out. Bernice slipped inside, latching the door behind her. As she washed her hands in the cramped sink, she couldn't shake Cindy's words. This was no simple misunderstanding. It was a window into the flight attendant's mindset. The lines were drawn. Cindy believed she could forcibly move someone she perceived as less deserving. And now, spurred by Reggie's intervention, she was stewing in resentment. When Bernice stepped back into the galley, Cindy had vanished. Martha offered a polite smile, asking if Bernice needed anything. Bernice shook her head and returned to her seat, her thoughts swirling. The tension was building, and experience told her that if left unchecked, it would explode eventually, like storm clouds gathering for a thunderous downpour at 30,000 feet. Nearly 2 hours into the flight, the captain made an announcement that they were cruising at altitude and on schedule. Some passengers used the time to stretch, others napped or dove into their books and movies. Bernice continued her quiet observation, noticing how passengers' expressions ranged from relaxed to uneasy. Word of the earlier seat switch confrontation had spread. A middle-aged man a few rows back whispered the details to his seatmate, who cast a concerned glance down the aisle toward Darlene. Darlene tried to occupy herself with her tablet, watching a film, though her demeanor remained tense. Every so often her eyes darted toward the aisle, as if anticipating Cindy's return. Bernice felt a pang of sympathy. No one deserved to feel uncomfortable simply because of the color of their skin or a flight attendant's personal biases. When Reggie rolled the cart toward Bernice's row again, she seized the moment for a quiet conversation. "Excuse me," she said in a low voice. "Are you all right? There seems to be some tension on board." Reggie sighed and leaned closer, mindful of surrounding ears. "I'm fine, Ma'am. Just dealing with an internal issue. Thank you for your concern. If you need anything at all, please let me know." Bernice nodded, aware that Reggie was doing his best to maintain professionalism. He knew better than to elaborate on a conflict in front of passengers. Still, the subdued sadness in his eyes told her that the incident with Cindy weighed heavily on his mind. Possibly he'd seen this sort of behavior before, or had suspected it. Now, it was laid bare in front of a plane full of witnesses. Almost on cue, Cindy reappeared from the forward galley, pausing at Bernice's row. Her stare lingered momentarily, scanning Bernice's face as if searching for signs of censure. Bernice kept her expression neutral, no sense in provoking the flight attendant until she had a complete picture. Cindy then moved on, adjusting overhead bins, but not offering any service to those rows. Once again, Bernice noted the disparity. She managed to be attentive in first class. But here, where she'd encountered conflict, Cindy's approach was one of avoidance or cool indifference. The tension in the air felt like static before a lightning strike. Bernice could almost see the pressure building behind Cindy's clipped strides, sense the frustration that might soon erupt. If the flight attendant confronted Darlene again, or another passenger, how far might it go? Bernice steadied herself for whatever was coming, determined to remain both watchful and ready to intervene if necessary. The flight was barely halfway completed, but it felt like they'd been in the air for days, every passing minute, a slow crawl toward a boiling point. Around the halfway mark of the flight, a passenger a few seats behind Darlene abruptly stood up, looking pale. She hurried to the lavatory, her hand pressed to her mouth as if battling nausea. Passengers parted to let her pass, and Reggie quickly followed to offer assistance if needed. Moments like these tested a flight crew's compassion and efficiency. Bernice watched Cindy's reaction. She remained firmly in her jump seat near the front, ignoring the commotion. Within minutes, Reggie returned, rummaging in a drawer for sickness bags. Martha was checking on the unwell passenger, offering ginger ale and tissues. Still, Cindy neither moved nor offered help. Her refusal to engage in normal flight attendant duties was glaringly obvious. A passenger, noticing Cindy's inaction, sent her a disapproving look. Cindy shrugged as if to say, "Not my problem." Bernice's internal alarm bells rang. Cindy's behavior had crossed from questionable to outright dereliction of duty. Flight attendants are obliged to respond to passenger needs, especially medical or discomfort situations. Yet it seemed Cindy was too consumed by her personal grievances to care. Suddenly, the father from row 19 pressed the call button again for assistance. This time it looked like one of the kids had spilled a drink. Bernice could see the orange juice dripping onto the floor. Cindy scowled but walked over, muttering under her breath. When she arrived, instead of calmly addressing the spill, she lectured the father in a hushed but angry tone about keeping your children under control. The father opened his mouth to protest, but Cindy cut him off, turning sharply to get paper towels. Her attitude was scathing and unapologetic, turning a minor accident into a tension-filled scolding. Bernice noted every second, her heart racing at the sheer audacity. As the cabin temperature of social relations soared, Darlene's voice suddenly rang out. "Excuse me, flight attendant. I need some assistance with the overhead bin." She was trying to retrieve a small bag, presumably for medication or personal items. Cindy glared in Darlene's direction, face tightening like a clenched fist. Without missing a beat, Cindy marched toward Darlene. Her voice cracked through the cabin. "After all the trouble you caused earlier, you think I'm going to bend over backwards for you?" She said it loud enough that at least 3 rows around them went silent in shock. Bernice felt her own pulse pound in her ears. This was no longer subtle discrimination. It was blatant, open hostility. Darlene blinked, stunned. "I just need my bag. It's stuck," Cindy scoffed. "Figure it out yourself." A hush of disbelief fell over the nearby passengers. Bernice had seen enough. This was beyond unprofessional. It bordered on abusive. And if Cindy didn't realize the potential ramifications, Bernice was certain the airline soon would. Bernice unfastened her seatbelt and stood. She steadied herself, mindful of how to reveal her authority without causing further chaos. Approaching Darlene, she offered a reassuring nod. "I can help you with that," she said, gently. Darlene flashed a grateful, if somewhat embarrassed, smile. Bernice reached the overhead bin and jostled Darlene's small bag free, handing it down. Darlene murmured her thanks, and Bernice gave her a respectful nod. Meanwhile, Cindy stood by, her lips parted in surprise. Perhaps she expected Bernice to stand idly by as many passengers might out of fear of causing a scene. But Bernice was no ordinary passenger. Cindy recovered her composure quickly. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," she said, her voice sounding more authoritarian than ever. "Passengers are not to stand in the aisle without a valid reason." Bernice met Cindy's gaze calmly. "I was assisting a fellow passenger. That's a valid reason." She returned to her aisle seat, but remained standing, her posture poised. The tension crackled between them like a live wire. Cindy hovered as though challenging Bernice to say more. Bernice took a measured breath. This was the critical moment when she could choose to identify herself as an FAA official or continue observing. She decided to hold back just a bit longer, giving Cindy one final chance to correct her course. Cindy's nostrils flared. "Don't test me," she hissed under her breath, leaning closer so only Bernice could hear. "I'll have you thrown off this plane if you start stirring trouble." A wave of disbelief washed over Bernice. She'd heard rumors of flight attendants threatening unruly passengers, but rarely had she seen one so openly threaten a passenger who merely offered help. Despite the fury burning in her chest, Bernice kept her cool. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm just doing what's right." At that moment, Reggie appeared, noticing the confrontation. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Cindy cut him off with a harsh glare, pivoting to walk away, her steps echoing with anger. Reggie looked between Bernice and Darlene, confusion etched on his face. Bernice gave him a reassuring nod, silently indicating that they would handle the matter later. Bernice sank back into her seat, her heart hammering. She knew that once they landed, the truth of her identity would come out. She just hoped that by then, Cindy wouldn't dig herself into a hole so deep that no apology or training program could pull her out. The seatbelt sign chimed again as the pilot announced a patch of turbulence ahead. Passengers obediently returned to their seats, buckled up and clutched armrests. Bernice glanced at her watch. There was still a couple of hours left in the flight. The tension with Cindy simmered in the cabin like a pot on the verge of boiling over. No one seemed relaxed. Some passengers exchanged worried looks. Others shook their heads in disbelief, having witnessed the flight attendant's hostility. Reggie made his way down the aisle, checking everyone's seatbelts. When he reached Bernice's row, he crouched slightly. "I'm so sorry for all of this," he murmured. "I promise I'll report it once we land. If you need anything, please let me know." Bernice appreciated his professionalism. He was trapped in a difficult position, trying to keep the peace and also recognizing that Cindy's behavior was inexcusable. But Bernice had no intention of letting this slide. She patted Reggie's arm gently. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered, "and I'll be making a report myself." After Reggie moved on, Bernice closed her eyes for a moment, debating the best approach to disclosing her identity. She had uncovered enough evidence of unprofessional conduct to warrant a formal investigation. The airline would have to answer to the FAA regarding training adherence to anti-discrimination policies and overall cabin conduct. She decided to wait until they landed to make her revelation. The immediate shock of unmasking herself as an FAA official mid-flight could escalate matters. She couldn't risk the flight being diverted or Cindy retaliating in a way that endangered passenger safety. So she let the cabin endure its uneasy quiet for the rest of the turbulence. The plane lurched and shook overhead, bins rattling. A child cried. Another passenger groaned with anxiety. When the turbulence subsided, Cindy finally reappeared, scowling to perform a perfunctory seatbelt check. She stopped at Bernice's row, scanning each passenger's belt. She paused, glaring at Bernice's face, then briskly moved on. Bernice felt a mix of sympathy, anger, and determination swirl in her gut. She sensed that in Cindy's mind, some line had been crossed, an inability to accept that her authority wasn't absolute, or that she'd been challenged by a black woman she viewed as inferior. Soon the pilot announced they were cruising steadily again. Bernice forced herself to inhale a calming breath. In just a couple of hours they would land, and the real confrontation would begin. And when it did, Bernice intended to ensure that justice was served in the name of every passenger who had ever suffered silent discrimination at 30,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight settled into a lull. Some passengers dozed off, heads tilted against windows or drooping onto travel pillows. A hush fell over the aircraft, the quiet hum of engines filling the air. Bernice flipped through a magazine, hoping a distraction might calm her nerves, but her thoughts kept circling back to Cindy. She sensed movement from the seat behind her. Darlene leaned forward, tapping Bernice gently on the shoulder. "I just wanted to thank you," Darlene whispered. "You stood up for me when no one else would." Bernice turned, offering a kind smile. "It's nothing," she said softly. "You deserve respect, just like everyone else." She hesitated, then decided to drop a hint. "Trust me, I'll make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. Let's just say I have a reason to bring this to the right people's attention." Darlene tilted her head, curiosity glinting in her eyes. "You're not just a passenger, are you?" Bernice tapped the side of her nose playfully, indicating she couldn't say more. A flicker of relief and hope crossed Darlene's face. She nodded in understanding, leaning back into her seat with a gentler expression. That simple exchange forged a connection between them, a silent promise that justice would be sought. A short while later, Martha passed by with a trash bag collecting discarded snack wrappers. She paused by Bernice's row, glancing around to make sure Cindy wasn't within earshot. Then in a quiet voice, she said, "I'm sorry. I can't speak for Cindy, but I want you to know that the rest of us don't condone what happened. It's not right." Bernice nodded, touched by Martha's sincerity. "Thank you," she whispered. She could see the conflict in Martha's eyes, loyalty to a co-worker clashing with moral obligations to passengers and airline standards. The rest of the cabin remained in relative calm, though the atmosphere was laden with tension, as if everyone was holding their breath. Bernice realized that in a way, many eyes were watching the next moves, either waiting for Cindy's temper to flare again, or hoping that the flight would end without further drama. But Bernice had a feeling that the final showdown was inevitable. Cindy's pride had been bruised, her biases exposed. People like that didn't usually back down without a fight. If Cindy chose to escalate, Bernice was prepared. As each minute brought them closer to Seattle, Bernice's resolve only grew stronger. She would not leave that plane without ensuring accountability was delivered. As the flight entered its final hour, the sun hung high in the sky, illuminating a sea of cotton candy clouds. The airline crew began preparing for the descent, collecting last-minute trash-checking seats and dimming cabin lights for the approach. From her seat, Bernice noted Reggie's thoroughness. He was ensuring each passenger's seatbelt was secured and that trays were stowed. Cindy remained scarce in the main cabin. When she did appear, her attention was fixed on anything but passenger comfort. If someone called for help, Reggie or Martha arrived first. Bernice could practically taste the friction in the air. And then it happened, the final spark. A traveler in row 24 accidentally knocked a cup of coffee off the tray table, sending it splashing onto Cindy's shoes as she walked by. Cindy froze. Her eyes flicked to the passenger, an older black woman. Then, in a swift motion, Cindy kicked the cup aside, hot liquid sloshing onto the aisle floor. "Do you know how much these shoes cost?" she spat. The older woman began apologizing profusely, reaching for napkins. But Cindy was having none of it. "God, why do I always get stuck with passengers like you?" She snarled, her voice loud enough to carry multiple rows. Several heads snapped around. An audible gasp rippled through the cabin, as though everyone collectively realized the line had been crossed tenfold. Bernice's pulse thundered. She unbuckled her seatbelt, prepared to intervene, when Reggie appeared again, seemingly from thin air. "Cindy." His voice carried an edge of authority. "That's enough. Please go to the galley right now." Cindy whirled on him, face twisted in rage. "Don't you dare tell me how to do my job." "I'm sick of Cindy." "Go, Reggie," repeated. His voice was calm, but ironclad, an impressive show of leadership under pressure. Passengers looked on, some filming with their phones. Bernice realized that this fiasco was being documented by travelers who would likely post it online the moment they landed. Cindy's career might be over before the airline even launched an investigation. Cindy let out a frustrated scream, then stomped off down the aisle, leaving Reggie and Martha to clean up the spill and console the shaken passenger. Bernice's chest felt tight anger coursing through her veins. This had gone beyond a mild discriminatory act. This was open hostility toward passengers of color in plain view. Bernice stood up, resolved. She might have wanted to wait until landing, but now was the time. She caught Reggie's eye and signaled. Reggie nodded, understanding that something significant was about to happen. Cindy had just signed her own fate, and Bernice intended to make sure the consequences followed her off this plane. As the plane began its initial descent into Seattle, Cindy remained holed up in the front galley. Reggie and Martha moved through the cabin, distributing landing instructions, ensuring bags were properly stowed and seatbacks were upright. Bernice took this moment to slip up the aisle, quietly making her way forward. She had her FAA credentials tucked into an inside pocket, ready to be revealed. Cindy was busy wiping coffee stains off her shoes with a paper towel, cursing under her breath. She nearly jumped when she saw Bernice approach. I told you to stay in your seat," she snapped, still bristling with anger. Bernice's voice was even, but her heart hammered in her chest. "I'm afraid you've made multiple breaches of airline policy, passenger rights, and professional conduct during this flight. I can't overlook that." Cindy's eyes flashed with indignation. "Who do you think you are? A sky marshal? Some self-appointed vigilante? Get out of my galley before I call the captain and have you detained." At that, Bernice pulled out her FAA identification, holding it in front of Cindy's face. "My name is Bernice Campbell. I'm an official with the Federal Aviation Administration. I was assigned to this flight for an undercover inspection." She paused for effect, letting Cindy see the seal and the seriousness in her eyes. "And I've documented every single incident." Cindy's jaw dropped color, draining from her face. Shock, fear, and stubborn anger vied for control of her expression. "I don't believe you," she stammered. "This can't be happening." "Oh, it's happening," Bernice replied, voice taut. "I've witnessed you verbally abusing passengers, singling out individuals based on race, neglecting your duties, and demonstrating behavior in direct violation of Delta Airlines policy and federal regulations. Once we land, I'll be submitting a full report to both the airline and the FAA. Tears of rage welled in Cindy's eyes. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. A hush settled in the galley, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional ding of the seatbelt sign. Bernice held Cindy's gaze, refusing to back down. This was the moment she'd waited for, the confrontation that would set the wheels of justice in motion. Finally, Cindy let out a choked laugh. You're lying." Bernice shook her head. "Feel free to check with the captain after we land, and rest assured he'll check with my superiors if you try to deny me disembarkation." She slipped her credentials back into her blazer, stepping aside. "I suggest you take your seat for landing and reflect on how you've treated people today. The FAA and Delta will decide what happens next." Without another word, Bernice turned and walked away, leaving Cindy rooted in place, stunned into silence. The immediate storm was over, but the real reckoning was about to begin. The plane made its final approach to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the view of evergreen forests and distant mountains unfolding beneath them. A tense calm enveloped the cabin. Passengers were buckled in quietly awaiting touchdown. The earlier incidents weighed heavily in the air, an unspoken understanding passing among them. They had all witnessed something extraordinary, for better or worse. Bernice, seated and buckled, felt her heart pounding. She glanced around. Darlene caught her eye, and Bernice offered a reassuring nod. Darlene managed a small smile in return. The father in row 19, the older woman with the spilled coffee, and several other passengers who had seen or experienced Cindy's outbursts, wore expressions of relief mixed with lingering anxiety. At last, the wheels touched the runway with a gentle thud. Passengers exhaled in near unison, some offering polite applause for the safe landing. Bernice waited patiently as the aircraft taxied to its gate. She knew the real work would begin the moment those cabin doors opened. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, everyone stood to gather their belongings. A few passengers rushed to connect with family or friends on their phones. Bernice noticed Reggie discreetly talking to the captain in hushed tones near the cockpit door. Cindy remained out of sight, presumably gathering her composure or hoping to avoid another confrontation. As Bernice waited, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she saw the father from row 19, a soft-spoken gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, his children clinging to his legs. Bernice simply nodded. Another passenger stepped forward, an older man, who had filmed part of the incident, whispering that he was willing to share the footage if needed. Bernice thanked him carefully, taking down his contact details. When the door finally opened, the usual jostle to exit commenced, but with an undercurrent of expectation. Would the authorities greet the flight? Would Cindy face immediate consequences? Bernice wasn't entirely sure, but she intended to speak with the airline's ground staff and her own FAA contacts immediately. As she reached the exit, Reggie touched her elbow. He murmured, "Thank you, Miss Campbell. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you had to see all of that." Bernice placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did your best. Thank you for your professionalism." She gave him her card. "Feel free to reach out. We'll need statements." With that, Bernice stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, the fresh Seattle air mingling with the stale cabin smell. She was now on the ground, but the journey for accountability was only just beginning. Cindy might have believed she could treat people however she wanted. Now it was time for her to learn the meaning of consequences. After disembarking, Bernice made her way through the terminal, phone in hand, quickly typing notes to preserve fresh details in her mind. She found a quiet corner near the arrival gates, out of the flow of traffic, then dialed her direct supervisor at the FAA, Robert Garvey. He picked up on the second ring. "Bernice, you landed safely?" he asked, skipping pleasantries. "Yes, just touched down." "I have extensive notes and multiple witness accounts," Bernice replied. "There's a serious issue with at least one member of this Delta crew, specifically flight attendant, Cindy. Last name unknown at the moment." She recounted the major events, summarizing Cindy's aggressive and racist behavior. Robert's voice darkened with concern. "Understood. We'll compile a formal report. We'll also reach out to Delta Airlines directly. Do you have enough for potential disciplinary action?" Bernice exhaled slowly. Absolutely. It wasn't just subtle discrimination. It was overt, repeated, and borderline harassment. I'd like to file immediate recommendations for a thorough internal investigation and potential suspension. And from what I observed, the airline's own anti-discrimination policies were violated as well. This needs to go through official channels ASAP. Robert agreed, promising to expedite the process. He mentioned that the FAA might also coordinate with the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection if any passenger decided to file a formal complaint. After finalizing details, Bernice hung up, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Now the onus would partly shift to her superiors to follow through, but Bernice wasn't finished yet. She glanced around the terminal until she spotted a Delta customer service desk. Approaching, she asked to speak with a station manager. Within a few minutes, she was led to a small office area behind the main counter. A woman in a crisp Delta uniform name tag, reading Tamara Jackson, greeted her politely. "How can I help you today?" Tamara asked, offering a seat. Bernice showed her FAA identification. Tamara's eyes widened, and she quickly closed the office door for privacy. Bernice laid out the basics. She had been on Flight 1765 for an inspection, had witnessed serious misconduct by a flight attendant named Cindy, and was officially reporting it. Tamara listened attentively, her face reflecting shock, then concern. She assured Bernice that Delta took such allegations with utmost seriousness. Though Tamara remained professional, Bernice detected worry behind her polite facade. This was a major headache for the airline, especially if the story went public, and with multiple passengers capturing footage on their phones, it almost certainly would. As Bernice left the office, Tamara promised an immediate internal review. Stepping back into the bustling terminal, Bernice felt the city's crisp Pacific Northwest air rush through automatic doors. The story, however, was far from over. Delta would conduct its own investigation, but Bernice intended to ensure no rug was big enough to sweep this under. Bernice had barely arrived at her hotel near Seattle-Tacoma International when her phone buzzed incessantly. Texts, notifications, and calls flashed across the screen. She saw messages from colleagues at the FAA and news alerts referencing a viral video of a Delta flight attendant's alleged racist confrontation. It seemed the story had already reached social media, and it was spreading like wildfire. Curious, Bernice tapped open a link a friend had sent. The video showed Cindy berating Darlene and the father in row 19, plus snippets of her meltdown over the spilled coffee. The audio quality varied, but Cindy's hostility was unmistakable. Comments flooded the post, ranging from anger and outrage to demands for accountability. Had Delta racism was starting to trend on Twitter. Bernice's phone rang her supervisor again. "Are you seeing this?" Robert asked. "It's everywhere. People are tagging the FAA and Delta. They're demanding immediate action." "I've seen it," Bernice replied. "I filed the official report, and I just spoke to Delta's station manager. They're aware. But with this going viral, they'll be under even more pressure to respond." Robert let out a low whistle. "Good. This kind of behavior is unacceptable and tarnishes the aviation industry as a whole. Keep me posted on any developments, especially if the airline tries to underplay it. The FAA is standing behind your report." After hanging up, Bernice scrolled through her messages. One was from Darlene, who had apparently found Bernice's work email listed on the FAA staff directory. Darlene thanked her again and expressed relief that people were rallying behind her on social media. Bernice wrote a quick reply, encouraging Darlene to file a formal complaint with Delta, and if she felt inclined, the Department of Transportation. Stepping away from her phone, Bernice gazed out the hotel window at Seattle's gray skyline. The swirling conversation online was a double-edged sword. It put public pressure on the airline to act swiftly, but it also risked turning the incident into a spectacle. Bernice hoped the focus would remain on real change, better training, proper accountability, and a genuine commitment to non-discrimination. That evening, Bernice tried to unwind with a warm cup of tea, but her mind buzzed. She replayed the events on the plane. Cindy's sneer, her hateful words. The next morning, headlines dominated the news. Delta flight attendant's racist outburst goes viral. Darlene's short interview aired widely. "I just wanted to travel in peace." She credited the kind soul who stood up for her, now revealed as an FAA official. Bernice, sipping hotel coffee, read Delta's statement on Twitter. "We do not tolerate discrimination. An internal investigation is underway. It was corporate, but at least responsive." Her phone rang Delta's corporate office. A man named Lawrence Colby spoke. "Ms. Campbell, we regret what happened on your flight. The attendant Cindy has been placed on leave. We welcome your input." Bernice remained professional. "I've filed my report with the FAA. I'll share a summary through the proper channels." Lawrence assured her that Delta would also contact the affected passengers directly. After hanging up, Bernice felt some relief, but kept her guard up. Public apologies often came fast under scrutiny, but real change required more than PR. Still, it was satisfying to know Cindy would no longer mistreat passengers. This time, accountability was unavoidable. A few days later, Bernice sat in a modest FAA conference room across from her supervisor, Robert Garvey, and colleague Lisa Hernandez. Robert reviewed her final report, nodding thoughtfully. "This isn't just a complaint," he said. "It's a pattern of bias and misconduct." Lisa added. Several passengers reached out with corroborating statements. Some even submitted video evidence. Bernice leaned forward. "So what happens now?" Robert explained that they would recommend Delta implement mandatory anti-discrimination training and re-evaluate conflict resolution protocols. A formal DOT hearing might also follow to assess civil penalties. Lisa mentioned Delta's request for Bernice to speak with their corporate ethics team. Surprised but encouraged, Bernice agreed. "If it helps create change, I'll do it." As the meeting wrapped, Robert handed her a new assignment schedule. Take a few days, then we'll need you on another route." Bernice accepted the papers with a faint smile. The ordeal on Flight 1765 had been grueling, but it reminded her why her work mattered. Passengers deserved safety, not just from mechanical failure, but from bias at 30,000 feet. She stood ready for whatever came next. The skies still needed watching, and she was more prepared than ever to do just that. Weeks later, Bernice received confirmation from Delta's Ethics and Compliance Committee Cindy had been terminated. The findings cited harassment, discrimination, and endangering passenger safety. Public backlash had prompted the airline to expand mandatory diversity and conflict resolution training across all crew levels. The FAA praised Delta's swift action, but vowed continued oversight. Reggie Martha and cooperative witnesses were formally thanked, while passengers affected by Cindy's conduct received apologies and travel vouchers. As for Cindy, any hopes of suing for wrongful termination dissolved under the weight of viral videos and damning witness accounts. Unable to secure another airline job, she reportedly relocated to a small town, her career in ruins, a harsh but fitting consequence. Meanwhile, Darlene spoke out through media outlets, encouraging black travelers to raise their voices. The father from row 19 echoed her sentiments, both becoming informal advocates for fair treatment in the skies. Bernice carried on with her inspections, each flight a reminder of Flight 1765's lessons. One act of prejudice could ignite powerful accountability. Though the journey toward equity was far from over, this case proved that no one passenger or crew is beyond the reach of justice. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey through Delta Flight 1765, a story where hidden truths took flight and justice soared even higher. In this cautionary tale, prejudice threatened to upend a simple cross-country trip, only to be dismantled by steadfast courage, compassionate allies, and the unwavering spirit of those who refused to be silenced. We witnessed how karma can land harder than any aircraft, delivering consequences swift and sure. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who value equality, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking tales. Your support fuels our mission to shine a light on stories that spark change, inspire understanding, and remind us that true justice can and must prevail. Together, let's make our world and our skies a place where respect is always on board.